Hey everyone, and welcome to the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Staub, and we have a really cool episode for you. Today, we have my partner in crime at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, the manager of the museum section. He's a game developer. He's a graphic and visual artist, and he has a wonderful pinball collection. You've definitely heard and seen him before, but it's awesome to have him here on the podcast today. One of my closest friends in the world and one of my favorite gamers alive, Mr. Brendan Bailey. Thank you and welcome.
Wow, that was the best introduction I've ever gotten. I appreciate that, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem, man. It's good to have you here, and it's good to talk about the Expo and everything that you're doing out there in the world. You know, I think part of what we want to do with this podcast, and at least what I wanted to do with this podcast, is I wanted to have a way to kind of showcase the folks who work at the Expo, who are involved in the community, and as well as, you know, people who are working on games and other things like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about. It's weird that retro is old, right? It means old, but there's always so much going on in the retro community. Whether it's, you know, indie games or some kind of gadgets and all these types of things that allow us to play retro games, people discovering old ROMs and all this stuff. So it's a very interesting field to be in. And Brendan, you kind of check off a few of these boxes here. So first and foremost, we should talk about the Expo itself and our experience with the Expo this year, especially from the museum section. For those of you out there who might not have been able to go to the Expo this year, Brendan and I were working in the museum section of the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, and the museum section actually expanded quite a bit. Brendan, how'd you spearhead that? Like, what was the process going through your head when you were thinking about making it bigger and better?
So one of the biggest determining factors for this year was where we were going to put the museum, because the previous time we had the Expo, which was pre-COVID back in 2019, we actually had some pretty realistic issues with where we were placed, because the sun beating in on the machines that we had actually caused some of our museum items to like break. It got very warm, and the direct sunlight on the second floor of the cradle actually really did a number. Took out the X68000 for the second day, and I think we had an issue with one other thing due to the heat. I can't remember what it was. And so it became a real like problem that we needed to solve, where we were like, okay, we need to put this section somewhere else, out away from the sun. So we found a really good spot within the Cradles Museum, which we put our own museum. So I started calling it the museum within a museum. And that section also just happened to have a lot more floor space for us to set up tables and display items. And it was just as well, because we had so many more items this year, just from people emailing me that wanted to bring stuff. The Expo bought more items. A lot of staff members from the Expo, volunteers, brought stuff. People that had brought stuff the previous show brought even more stuff. I was constantly getting Slacks and DMs on Facebook and emails from people that are just like, hey, you want this for the museum? You want this for the museum? And I just kept adding it to the list. And I did say no to a couple things, but I said yes to as many things as possible. And we ended up with just nearly doubling the size of the museum this year, just because so many other people brought stuff this time.
Yeah, there was so much stuff. I was overwhelmed at just how much stuff, and so impressed about how much stuff was brought, how much of it was, you know, just kind of donated in for the weekend. And I thought it was so cool that, like, and how'd you explain it now? It's like, I love how it's just like, yeah, you know, we didn't really have to ask for stuff. People were reaching out. You know, it's so cool that the community would come together and go about that. And obviously, you know, you talked about the X68000 in the sun. That was a travesty. That was such a bummer, but I'm glad you guys were able to get it fixed and up and running really nicely for the Expo. You would say that that's still kind of like the shining jewel of the museum, right?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like things that people talk about, the X68000 still kind of reigns supreme. But we had a lot of dev units this year,
Yeah.
which are even more rare and unique than the X68000. So, like as far as what people like to sit down and play, I think the 68000 is still one of the coolest things that we have. But as far as like just pure rarity and like oh man, you might not see this anywhere else, seeing some of those dev units and the prototype units and stuff like that. I mean, those are some really really rare items that you can't just go out and buy. On eBay or Yahoo Auction Japan or wherever you find these crazy systems. Those are things that you just got to get really lucky and really really dig deep to try and find. So luckily, we had some donors that were willing to bring those types of items this year.
Yeah, we had a GameCube Dolphin, right? The unit. We had a
The PS2
PS2,
tool
PS2
was really
Tool.
cool.
Yeah, we had the
Yeah, which is
PSX.
massive. If you've never seen that, you should do a Google search and look at the size of the PS2 tool. It is an absolutely massive console. I mean, it's
Yeah,
easily the biggest like single item we had in there just in terms of like pure mass.
yeah. It's essentially a giant PS2. It looks like a giant PS2 standing up on its side, and
Yeah, from
it's
what I from
impressive.
what I understand, it's used to it has multiple video outputs where you can actually see the game code and the game itself running
Yep.
at the same time, which is kind of cool. We talked about possibly setting that up for next year so that people could actually see it in action.
Well, if they want to
Um,
see it now, that's 100% right because I know this because I actually worked on the video with George Portugal, who is kind of like the Long Island retro gaming wizard who seems to be able to fix anything and everything out there. Just to give George that shout out, he's an awesome guy, an amazing collector, and just an incredible, all around video game brain. We actually did that for one of our videos. So if you want to go search that out on our YouTube channel, you can actually see me and George working, playing around with the PS Tool. But it would be so cool to see that in person and to have that there running next year. But there were so many cool units, the dev units and all those things. To me, I'm pretty. I really want that Super Famicom TV so very badly.
oh yes, that's
Yeah,
a good one. I was really pleased that we had a bunch of systems like that where you had the game systems built into the TV. So we had the SF1, we had the Sharp
yeah.
NES TV. Dan Casero had the
Turbo Dan,
Turbo Dan had the Sega computer, the Megavision.
which was awesome.
Is that what it's called? The Megavision,
I
right?
think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that has a built-in Sega Genesis. So we had a lot of those types of consoles where uh, TVs and computers with game systems built in. We didn't have any of those in 2019. So a huge boost in that department of some of those like obscure uh devices that have game consoles built in. So it was pretty cool to have those together.
Yeah, and they look so good, right? When you see those games running on those screens, they look excellent. It's almost equivalent to running a console through a PVM or something, right? It's like the TV itself is built and made for the console and for the games that it's playing. I was playing some stuff on that Dreamcast TV we have, which I think is great. That's one of my favorite items there, especially of the new stuff. Obviously, the X68000 stands out as just a beast in the way you have it set up with all the speakers and the mixer and all the MIDI stuff. Like it sounds so good. Like you can hear that thing from like across the floor. And I was actually also, I thought it was really cool too that we had some extra folks working with us this year. Brendan and I, in I believe it was 2019, right before COVID. It was pretty much just you and me running in the museum. This year we had some extra help, and Eric with his Pokemon stuff was actually also very very cool. I really enjoyed having that with the museum section. He was able to get people like old download codes from like event Pokemon, and he had all these codes and download codes back from like 1998 and onward. So people were bringing in their old Pokemon games or like their Game Boy Advance Pokemon games all the way up through 3DS and just kind
Yeah,
of
that was
getting
a
access to that stuff.
that was a tremendous hit.
Yeah, man.
Eric is one of our volunteers. He had brought stuff in 2019. He donated some items for the museum. quite a few items, I might add. And I was able to recruit him to volunteer this year, and he just came up with that idea sort of last minute to have the Pokemon Center, and it was such a huge hit that it's probably going to be expanded into its own section next year.
Yeah,
And
we had
it was the Sega Terra Drive. My bad. It
Terra
was
Drive.
the Terra Drive was the name of that computer.
Yeah, that thing was amazing. Yes, we had talked by day 3 or day 2.5 of or like day 1.5 of the expo, with all of the traffic that Eric was getting. I'm like, we just need to give this guy a Pokemon Center with I have many ideas. I would love to see Pokemon Stadium and maybe even Pokemon Coliseum running, doing all this trading and all that stuff if we can get all the tools for it. But the museum, for those of you who don't know, the museum within a museum is for more of the odd stuff, the stuff that you don't see every day. And while there was like a Super Famicom and there's stuff like that out there, the museum is really for the stuff that is more rare, stuff that a lot of import stuff, a lot of old special stuff that you don't always see, right? It's a lot of fun, and folks get to play some of their favorite games.
Yeah, we've raised the bar. We've
Yeah.
raised the bar on what we consider a museum item. I mean, early on we had like a 3DO and a Jaguar, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, all right, we've moved on from just those were mass-produced consoles. Yeah, they're more uncommon than like, your Super Nintendo or your PlayStation, but we've gotten to a point where it's like to maximize the space, we want to put out like the weirdest stuff we can find.
Yeah.
That we want to find the most obscure things, oddball computers, stuff that was only released in Japan or exclusively in Europe, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So things that just weren't readily available in the United States or easy to get or developer units, prototype stuff, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really the best pieces for the museum. And as it bled into like, the retro PC section, as that kind of went into that lunar module room where you could play Space Invaders in front of the lunar module. I really do think that the setup was just really aesthetically pleasing. It was a really great place to be, and hopefully people had a lot of fun. I know I did. And even though we're working the convention, it's just as fun being there working as it is being a guest. So Brendan, you and I usually like to bounce ideas off each other, what we want to do for the future. But do you have any plans for 2023? What you're thinking about now for August of 23?
I think the big thing really is to marry the vintage PC collection with the museum, because a lot of those old PCs are very kind of like museum worthy at this point.
Yeah.
Things that people either never saw as a kid or haven't seen in years. And there's quite a bit of overlap between some of the vintage PCs that we have in the museum section versus the vintage PC room. And so I think if we can get enough of a bridge between the two rooms, we can kind of combine those sections into one giant like vintage PC / console museum.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as other plans, it's really just going to depend on what people are willing to bring. I think we've gotten a lot of the like the Hallmark systems kind of on lockdown.
Yeah,
between the regular Expo volunteers that bring stuff, but I'm hoping that somebody that was at the Expo this year is going to email me and be like, "Oh, I love the museum section. I have this. Can I bring that? Can I bring this?" And we had Pat Contry, the Pat the NES Punk, came and saw the museum early on Saturday, I think. So I was able to give him he came at the perfect time because I was kind of done setting up, and I was able to just give him a quick like private tour of the whole place, and he loved everything that he saw because he's a hardcore collector. He's seen a lot of he's probably seen a lot of crazy stuff, and he owns a lot of crazy stuff. So who knows? I mean, he and Ian are big fans of the Expo, so like it would be awesome if he was willing to bring something from his collection. And that kind of thing. That would be great.
That would be awesome, especially something that the rarities and the weird stuff is always good to have. I like that's it. It's stuff like that. It's getting some stuff that would really excite folks in the way that you and I get excited about the stuff we have. And I was just so happy with how everything was going this year with the museum and the expo at large. I hope for those of you who visited the expo, I hope you had a wonderful time and enjoyed it. I also hope that you go to Long Island Retro's website and you fill out the survey if you haven't done that. I know it's a little late. It's about 2 months past the survey, past the expo being over, but yeah, be sure to check that out and fill out that survey because that helps us move forward and continue to follow us on YouTube and stuff like that as we continue to post more videos and stuff. But Brendan, you did the museum, right? You're running this museum. You and I are kind of making sure everything works. We have amazing help from the folks that the volunteers that helped with us. But we also have to talk about something very special that you're working on as a kind of upstart game dev. Because you have decided to kind of walk the line and between gamer and artist and creator, and you're working on a game. You've taken on the arduous task of developing your own game, which I believe mostly using self-taught tools and putting together some really great stuff for those of you out there who don't know about this. Brendan, why don't you tell us about the game you're developing?
Yeah, it's hard to find a place to start, but I mean, just being locked up during COVID pandemic times, you start looking at all the games that you either have played or want to play, and then the other idea starts creeping in your head. It's like, well, what if I make a game instead of playing another game or buying another game or or replaying another game? What if I make a game? How hard could it be, right?
Yeah, how hard
and
can it be, Brendan?
Well, it's really, really hard. It's so I got started by looking at different different game engines and just watching a couple YouTube tutorials. And the very first tutorial I watched about game dev, the narrator came on and he said there's no one thing in game development that is really hard, but game development is death by 1,000 cuts because you have to do so many little things
Yeah.
to make one big thing. And that's why game development teams end up being really big, especially at the big studios. That's why these studios employ thousands of people, is because it is death by 1,000 cuts. But it's it's easier to have 1,000 people take one cut each, right?
Yeah.
Than for one person to take them all, which is what I'm doing.
Yeah. So
I'm attempting to develop a game completely on my own, which has been done before by a few games. If you've ever played Axiom Verge, which is a wonderful game that was developed by a single person. Stardew Valley is a huge game that was developed by a single developer. What's the other one? Iconoclasts, which is one of my favorite indie games and very underrated, was made by one person. And the development times on these games are kind of crazy. I mean, Axiom Verge took 5 years. I think Iconoclast took like 8 years. And now that I'm sort of going down this road, I completely understand why, because to be able to create art for a game and create sound and music for a game and story for a game, and not to mention the code of the game and making the game fun and enjoyable, combining all those things is really, really difficult, and it's really time consuming. But it's also very rewarding when things start to click. And so I went into this with a very open mind and didn't put any pressure on myself to like get anything done in any sort of time span. It was just, take the next step, like be better at this than you were the day before, learn something new, overcome a challenge. So I've always been a more artistic, creative person with both visual and sound, but I'm by no means am I a software developer. So, anybody that goes into solo game dev is going to hit some challenges. Like that, you're not going to be able to do everything right out of the gate, but you can learn. You can get better. And so that's really what I've been doing. I've been sort of leaning on my strengths with the design of the characters and the design of the sprites and the music and of the game, because those are things I can do a lot more easily, and then using that to kind of bring me into the world of development and learning how to code and everything. But I know this was like a long-winded answer, but
That's fine.
anyway, anyway, the name of the game is Nixie, and Nixie is a robot that you play as. He's the main character of the game, and it is a 16-bit Sega Genesis style Metroidvania type game. And yeah, this is and listen, the Metroidvania genre is one of those genres that, like, listen, there's a lot of Metroidvania games out there. Like, it's been done before. But some of the most successful indie games are Metroidvanias. Hollow Knight and Axiom Verge were both hugely successful games, and they really are just sort of standard Metroidvanias. And the reason I think they succeeded is because they just had a great art, they have great story, they have great music, great atmosphere, and I think that's sort of what I'm going for with Nixie, is to not reinvent the wheel with anything.
Hmm.
Because I'm not a talented enough like coder to reinvent the wheel. I have to kind of rely on tried and true things like platforming and enemy combat and that kind of thing, and item upgrades and map exploration, things that have all been done before. But I think if I can do them in a style that people like, with characters that people really gravitate towards, I think that's going to end up being the strength of Nixie, and
Yeah.
really what I want to what I hope to bring to the table.
No, absolutely. I've been following Nixie for before many people knew about it. Brendan and I have been talking about Nixie for, I would say, close to, is it close to 2 years now that we've been talking
Yeah, I
about it?
mean, it's like I've been, by no means is this a full-time occupation.
Yeah.
It's like I still work my day job, right? And it's like, so I would say I use the term seriously lightly, because there'll be I'll let a whole month go by where I'm doing other things. I'm prepping for the expo or something,
Yeah.
and I don't get any work on it. But I'd say I've been seriously working on it for about a year.
Yeah.
You know, I had the idea probably about 2 years ago and started messing around with Unity, doing some tutorials, making a few sprites here and there. But it was
Hmm.
just sort of like, I'm
Yeah.
not sure where this is going to go, but we'll see. We'll keep going.
Well,
But I would say I've been seriously working on it for a year.
Well, for those of you who are interested in checking out what Nixie's all about, you can go to nixiegame.com. That is Nixie game, GAME.com, to see everything Brendan's working on. Brendan, you do a great job kind of keeping people updated with your devlog and the artwork and the music. It's all there. So you can get a taste, if you're really interested in seeing what Nixie's all about. You can get a real taste of what this game's going to be about, just by going to nixiegame.com and taking a look at the images and the graphics. And I think you have some videos, short videos there, and you have tons of music. People should be following your music in general. I've always been a fan of everything that you've done. We've been sharing songs back and forth for years now, and it's always really great to see what you're working on. The artwork is impeccable. The translation of those to 16-bit is so cool. And seeing Nixie kind of start from like a couple of little images that you sent to these landscapes that you're building is really impressive. And yeah, I understand what you're saying with the whole Metroidvania thing, and it's kind of like a tried and true genre at this point, but it is a genre, right? It is a genre now, and you put the interesting spin on it with your characters and your story. So, can you give anyone any input on like what the story's about, or are you going to keep that under wraps for now?
No, the story is full of twists and turns. So even if I
Hmm.
give you the initial premise, like where things go is not where they first seem like they're gonna go. But the story is basically that Nixie has been built by his inventor to return to a space colony that has been overrun with androids.
Hmm.
This was a space colony that once androids used to live in harmony with humans.
Hmm.
Things didn't go well. There was a mutiny. All the humans were either killed or kicked off this colony, and now it's controlled completely by android life. but the inventor of Nixie has discovered that his son was left behind on this colony and somehow survived for many years on his own. And so Nixie has to go back and save his own inventor's son from this colony. The kicker is that when Nixie gets there, he's not necessarily met with he's met with open arms by some people and distrust by other people. So there's a little bit of a Pocahontas dances with wolves kind of thing, where like he kind of like sympathizes with some of the people, some of the androids that he meets there, and then others of them are not so nice. So it's very much, there's no central villain established right off the bat. So it's very much, you don't really know who to trust, that sort of thing. And some people seem nice, some people seem really evil. There's different factions, that kind of thing. So and like I said, it doesn't really go down. It's not a simple story. I kind of like the idea of taking like a wholesome cartoon looking character and kind of seeing how far you can go and kind of make things a little bit more dark than you would expect a certain story to go based on how it looks on the outside. So there's definitely, Nixie might look like cute and cheery on the outside, and it certainly is, but as the story progresses, you might be in for some unexpected emotional toll. So, but I like that. I like that. I always like that in fiction, where like animated movies and whatnot, or cartoon series, where like you're not expecting this cartoon or this something that looks kind of juvenile or kind of innocent. You're not expecting it to really hit you like with like, oh damn, like this got heavy, or like I'm connecting with something on a deeper level than I was expecting to connect. I thought this was just going to be like a goofy cartoon show or a quirky game or something. So yeah, I definitely want people to be I definitely want there to be like a little bit of like unexpected depth to the story. So
Well, good. I like that a lot. And I think that's kind of some of the best stuff I think in video games right now is going on in the indie space. The indie developers are taking kind of tried and true formats, right? Whether it be Metroidvania, platformer, RPG, and they're taking inspiration from these genres and these games, and they're kind of putting a spin on it to give it more of a modern feel, give it more of a maturity, even though, like you said, it looks like a cartoon. Games like Undertale, right, being a prime example of doing something like that. Even more recently, a game like Omori, which kind of just looks like Earthbound, but really deals with depression, anxiety, and stuff like that, with younger characters. So Nixie, is this fun-looking kind of Saturday morning cartoon-looking robot. But knowing that there's going to be some emotional depth and story depth is really cool. And now my question is, like, for Nixie in general, the game in general, like, where are you drawing your inspiration from? Like, what things like really stand out? Obviously Metroid and Castlevania, because it's a Metroidvania, but like what makes a Nixie? Like what's the recipe?
So the best compliment that I've gotten on the game so far is that it looks like a treasure game. And every time somebody says that, it just fills my heart with joy, because Dynamite Headdy for Sega Genesis was one of my all-time favorite games and still is.
Yeah.
And the art style is definitely pulled from there. So the fact that people feel that it looks like a treasure game, like that means a lot when I hear that.
Yeah.
And so I would say games like Heady, Ristar for Genesis. Certainly a bit of Hollow Knight with the combat. There'll be hack and slash combat. The Messenger is another game that I'm a big fan of, and a recent indie game. Just in terms of overall style and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the big ones. Obviously, I mentioned Iconoclasts earlier. That's another very story heavy Metroidvania style game. I think the Metroidvania games, it's kind of like an untapped genre for storytelling. Like, it's been done. I thought Bloodstained did it very well, telling a linear story in a non-linear game. Which is hard to do. Hollow Knight hits you with a lot of lore, but doesn't necessarily have like a tremendous narrative in it. But there's like a huge world and a huge backstory to learn about. So like that's like a different way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, all those games kind of play a factor. So, definitely leaning heavy on the 16-bit kind of look.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it
but
definitely has
pulling inspiration from a variety of sources.
it definitely has that Genesis feel, right? Then Genesis look. Can we expect an FM synth soundtrack?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the original my original plan was to do the whole soundtrack as FM synth,
Yeah.
and then I started experimenting with, like, I guess what I could really only describe as like retro MIDI sound, like early 90s, like Sega CD style MIDI sounds.
Yeah.
And I just really fell in love with composing with those sounds, and it
Hmm.
has it just has a higher fidelity
Yeah.
quality to it, and I just love the way it sounds. And I love FM synth as well. And I've written a couple of the music tracks with both the MIDI and the FM synth like versions. So my idea was, if I ever do a Kickstarter for this game, one of the Kickstarter goals would be to redo the entire soundtrack as FM synth and
Yeah.
give the player the choice if they want to listen to the MIDI version or the FM synth version, which has which definitely does have precedent in like the retro gaming world, because the X68000 has that feature in a lot of games where you can choose between listening to the MIDI soundtrack or the internal FM synth soundtrack. So, um, if I get to that point and there's a Kickstarter and people are actually interested, I think that would definitely be like a really good stretch goal for the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be a really fun goal. For those of you out there who want to follow the progress of Nixie and see when there's a Kickstarter or a Patreon setup, you just got to go to nixiegame.com. That's Nixie game.com to just get all those updates. Now, Brendan, at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo 2022, you actually had a panel talking about Nixie and indie game development. Now, how'd that go? Like, give us a little bit of a window in. I wasn't able to see it, unfortunately, because I was working.
So the panel went phenomenal,
Great.
and I was really nervous because I suffer from like major imposter syndrome, especially with game development, because I've never released a game. I'm just doing this on my own. I'm putting stuff out there with no, I'm not involved in any game studios. I don't have any partners. So, like I said, I haven't actually released this game or released any demos yet. So it's like, for me to give a panel on game development seemed like a little like premature. But the the guys at the expo were looking for people on the team that wanted to do presentations, and it's like, well, I have been cramming a ridiculous amount of game dev trivia and knowledge and tips for the last year. I could talk about this. And so I threw together a PowerPoint with everything that I've just accumulated, all the knowledge I've accumulated just from listening to other people's YouTube videos or podcasts about game dev, and scrolling through Reddit threads and everything. And I was able to make a presentation out of it. I tried to cover just a little flavor of like every aspect of creating a game, from the game engines that are out there, software for making art, pixel art versus high res art, Photoshop, yada yada yada, software and resources for making sound and music, storytelling in games, writing, places you can go. And then also a whole section about like how to market a game, social media marketing, and the types of communities that you can join, to meet people in the game dev community if you want to form like a studio or make a team, so that you're not doing everything on your own. And I was really pleased with um like all the Q&A that we did towards the end, because it didn't feel so much like Q&A. It felt like I was just having a discussion with a lot of people that were there. Because the first question I asked the audience was, if anybody had ever thought about making their own game before, and almost everybody in the audience had put their hands up.
Yeah.
And so some of the people that were there were actively working on games, or I met some artists and I met some composers. I met people that were interested in that. So really felt like I was having like a discussion with people in the audience, and just meeting people. It was really great. I would absolutely give that panel again next year, hopefully with some new updates.
Very cool. Glad to hear it went well. Glad to hear you had such positive feedback. Hopefully, you got some more folks in the Discord after after the panel. Because Nixie
Oh yeah.
folks out
Well,
there.
I put all the links on the screen, so during the final Q&A, it couldn't be missed. But
So, folks, if you do follow Nixie on social media, you can also join the Discord that Brendan has set up, which is great. He gives you updates. I'm terrible at Discord, so I just tune in when I remember to. But it's a great way to stay in touch with people who are interested in what you're working on, and I really enjoy using Discord for that. So, Brendan, the panel was great, the expo was great, the museum was awesome. You're working on this game, you're doing a million things. I'm not going to ask you, the question of what do you do after Nixie, because I think that's so far, it seems like it's so far away that you might not even have thought about it at this point. I will pressure you into making a turn-based RPG, but we can talk about that at another time. But
hey, you never know. I mean,
yeah, I do that with everyone. I just pressure everyone into taking their property and turning it into a turn-based RPG.
I
So
mean, there would be enough characters to do an RPG
I'm
with the Nixie
just I'm
characters for
just
sure.
saying. I'm just saying. They didn't do it with Shovel Knight. You should do it. So
Pitch it to Yacht Club. Be like, I
yeah.
made this whole game using your property. Do you want it?
Yeah, the Order of No Quarter. So
If it was good, they might just be like, you know what?
yeah,
Yeah.
here's $1 million.
If not, then you could just strip the sprites out and rewrite
Yeah,
the story
and
and
make a new game with timed hits. So Brendan, I want to talk about one last thing before we wrap today. I obviously I see everything you post on the internet. And it looks like you're, for those of you who don't know, one of Brendan's other passions, because clearly he doesn't do enough with his life.
I got too many hobbies.
Too many hobbies.
Bad.
As he sits in a room that I'm looking at right now, literally covered in synths, and making a video game, running the museum here for Lorient Retro Gaming. Brendan also, not only does he collect, but he also repairs and sells pinball machines, which is has to be a headache constantly. I mean, that's every time I see a pinball machine, I'm like, this thing is beautiful. I would love to have one, but man, I would not want to repair it.
The number one thing I have said a million times to people just talking about pinball, whether it's people that are brand new to pinball or people that are well entrenched in the hobby, I say the same thing to everybody, and that's that it is an absolute miracle that they even got made in the first place. I mean, they are just ridiculous objects. I mean, they're absurd. I mean, the way the complexity and the amount of parts and complex design details that have gone into these machines just so that somebody could put 25 cents in or 50 cents in and bat a ball around for a little while. They're absurd. They are absurd products. They're also amazing.
They are one of it's such a cool device. It's such a cool thing. Seeing a pinball machine in a house, in an arcade, is always super special. I know Long Island Retro Gaming has been talking about expanding our pinball section and getting more pinball into, I guess, our free play area, which I think would be great. But I understand, they are unruly, large, unwieldy devices that break all the time. But when they're working, and like being in your basement, Brendan, at your house, when they're working and they're all on and all running, it just has that, nothing quite feels like it. Now, I love seeing a bunch of arcade cabinets next to each other. Like that's a dream for me. Like if I can walk into my own basement or someone's house or an arcade and I see Street Fighter 2 next to Donkey Kong, next to Pac-Man, next to, you name it, right? All the sounds and the bells and whistles and all that stuff is really great to see in a dark room. But walking into your basement with the lights dim and seeing all those, I don't know how many pinball machines you have at this point, it seems like the collection just continues to grow, is one of the coolest experiences I think I've had, going to a friend's house and just hanging out and playing pinball. And I'm rubbish at pinball, and I'm still slowly trying to figure out how to play the games. But tell us, what's your pinball collection like these days?
Oh man, well, I just hit 30 machines.
Hey, you should get a ribbon.
Yeah. And I people listening that are in the pinball hobby or just getting into the pinball hobby probably assume that I'm like extremely wealthy to have that many. But the truth is that I bought most of them years ago before the price of pinball machines skyrocketed. And even the games that I get today, I just wait until I can get a crazy deal on it, or even I've even gotten games for free. I don't go out and just buy them, for what they sell for retail. Because if I were to try to build my collection that I have now, like in 2022 dollars, it would be impossible. I wouldn't be able to even afford probably a quarter of what I've got down there.
Yeah.
So I'm really lucky that I was able to get my hands on what I got, for the prices that I did. And it's kind of it's a double-edged sword, because it's kind of a bummer that pinball has gotten so expensive. But it has only gotten expensive because it's gotten really popular. Like there's more people interested in pinball now than like in probably since, I don't know, either the early 90s or the 70s. Like those are the other two times where pinball really peaked, right? So it's definitely riding a wave of popularity that's like that is like a breath of fresh air for a lot of us that were in the hobby, 15 years ago, where pinball seemed to be on death's door. But anyway, back to the collection. I mean, yeah, so I've got 30 machines. I strictly collect, well, not strictly, but I mostly collect games from the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, from that entire decade. I have a few machines from the early 90s as well, but that's the 80s is kind of like my sweet spot. Those are the games that I played as a kid the most. I find them to just be the most aesthetically beautiful machines. The themes are original and quirky and weird. And I just adore those games. And the other nice thing is about those games are even today are still significantly cheaper than the new machines that are still coming out today.
Well, like the Stern machines and stuff like that, or they're just like $8,000 or ten thousand
Yeah, I
dollars or
mean
something.
every new game that comes out at this point is basically, an $8,000 investment at a minimum, and
Yeah.
it's like it's like $8,000. I probably bought I probably have that invested in almost all of my machines.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, but that's how crazy the market has shifted with pinball. I mean, back in the day, as they say, it's like you could go out and get almost any machine you wanted, any 80s machine, you could find it for like $500-$600,
Yeah.
or even less if it was beat up, or somebody just wanted it out of their house.
Yeah.
And the market has changed so crazy. But yeah, the new machines, Stern is still making games. You've got Jersey Jack Pinball that just
Yeah.
released Toy Story, and the Toy Story machine, the base model of the Toy Story game is $12,000. It's like, you want to have Toy Story pinball in your house, you got to fork over five figures.
Yeah, man, that's a lot of cash. That's a
And
lot of
and
cash.
and there's guys that just do, and I'm not one of those guys. Like all the new machines that come out, I like seeing what comes out, and you know I'll play them. There's some arcades that are sprouting up on Long Island that have pinball, and they have the new machines, so I'm able to actually play them. But these aren't games. I can't just go out and buy those games. It's just,
Yeah, sell a kidney, you'll be fine.
yeah, exactly. So
Um, so I saw recently you just picked up Haunted House, right?
yes, this was a long time Holy Grail machine that I had been putting off in favor of other Holy Grail machines that I wanted to get. But yes, the triple decker Gottlieb Haunted House pinball machine. It is the first pinball machine with a continuous 3-level playfield. So it's got the main playing field, then it has an upper deck in the back, and then it has a sunken playfield in the bottom of the playfield.
Amazing.
That the bottom of the main playfield. That's it goes really well with the theme of like a haunted house, where you can go to like these different levels of the mansion.
Very
But
cool.
I got the opportunity to get it. It's October, Halloween's coming, and I just decided, like, you know what, now's the time.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, I seen the pictures of it on the internet, and it looks impressive. With your pinball collection, is there You said Grails. Is there like one end all be all pinball game that you've wanted, or you've kind of got everything you want?
Well, there's games that I have sold that I wish I hadn't sold.
Oh yeah,
Um, One of them is a game called Bonsai Run,
yeah.
which is if you look it up, it has a complete vertical playfield in
Oh
the
wow.
back box. It's a one of a kind game, and I actually had one of those machines uh, a long time ago, and I sold it to buy a car,
I
and
mean, I mean,
I really wish I had kept the game instead
well,
of the
I
car.
guess you didn't like the car that much.
Yeah, it's just like I keep looking back and I'm like, I could have gotten the money together somewhere, some other way than selling that machine.
Yeah,
And
but
I that was my biggest regret selling that game. I wish I get. And now, of course, the Bonsai Run is worth tremendous amount more money now than when I sold it for. So now it's even worse. It's like, oh, even if I want to get one back, I got to fork over 4 times what I sold it for. So
yeah,
it's not good. So
and it's an expensive hobby.
yeah, yeah,
Any
but
is there anything? So pretty much anything that now that's a grail for you is something that you sold and got rid of and want to just get back.
not entirely. There's a couple games I want to get. I'm really getting interested in some of the earlier games from the 80s that just have incredible artwork.
Yeah,
There's a classic game that Bally put out called Xenon,
yeah,
which has an absolutely stunning backlash. I mean, one of the most beautiful pinball machines ever made, by far. And I would love to get one of those. There's another really cool game from Bally that's called Vector. If you look up the game Vector, like probably like the most 80s looking machine you'll ever see. I mean, it is just the best of 80s aesthetic, like in one pinball machine. Like it's just so cool. So like
yeah,
those two games would be great to pick up next to each other, but might have to sell some of the games that don't get played as much. I might have to
yeah.
sell those to pick those up these
Yeah.
days. So
And because space is also kind of at a luxury, so I totally get it. But you know what, Brendan, I think you'll get the games you want. I feel like you're always picking up a new pinball machine, or you always have something new that you're working on that's really interesting. So
there's no rush. They end up finding their way to me.
yeah, eventually, you got to be in it to win it, and I feel like you're just in that crowd, and
Yeah.
you come across these pinball things all the time. And they're a blast to play, man. And your machines are great. They're clean. They're in great running order, and just a blast. I have to come over and play pinball. It's been far too long. And you and
I
I
know.
also have a lot of other stupid work that we have to do. So, um,
Yep. Too many hobbies.
too many hobbies, and it's just it's how it goes. I think we folks out there in the retro game community like this stuff so much that we kind of like all of it, and after time, it's like it starts to stack up. But Brendan, you got a lot of great things going on. You got the Nixie, you got the LIRG Museum, you got pinball, you got all of this stuff. So once again, thank you so much for all that you do with us and all that you do and put out there in the world. I think game development is a really special thing. I think we hold video games at a very high regard from a creative standpoint as people who are both artists and gamers. I think there's a specialness to it, and I really think what you're doing is artful and really special. Um, Anything else you want to tell us before we wrap up today? Let the people know where they can find you.
No, I mean I appreciate everything you said, Mike, and for having me on. I've tried to become as humble as a person as I can possibly be with all this stuff going on. But I appreciate you shouting me out with everything. But yeah, I mean you mentioned it a couple of times. NixieGame.com is where you can see the development of the game. There's links on that website to my Twitter, my Instagram, the Discord link, my YouTube channel. I try to keep most of those updated with any development on the game, so you could pretty much follow any one of those. But I would say the Twitter and the Discord are probably the most updated. So, but yeah, every week I'm knocking out little features on the game. I'm really barreling towards getting some sort of demo created so that I could at least get some initial feedback on how the game feels. Probably won't have a lot of content in it, but it will at least give an idea of the controls and the feel. so that I can know that people like the way, the jump feels or the attack feels good or those kinds of things. So that's like the first goal is to hit that controller demo.
Amazing. So be sure to send that my way. I want to play the demo.
Oh yeah,
I want to play the demo, Brendan. I want to play it right now.
We're getting there.
Folks, follow Brendan on all of these places. Follow Nixie wherever you can. And be sure to check out what Brendan's doing. And Brendan, once again, thank you so much for being here and spending some time with us today at the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. Folks out there on the internet, you can find us at liretro.com. We have a Patreon. We have a Twitter and an Instagram. It's just LI Retro. So be sure to keep an eye on everything we're doing here in the Long Island Retro Gaming space. And there will be more news coming soon on events. We have an event coming up around the holidays, I believe on December the 10th. Yes, on December the 10th, we have the Festival of Gaming, which will be at the Cradle Aviation Museum. Sadly, I cannot be at that event, but many of our other amazing Long Island Retro folks will be there. And please feel free to keep checking the podcast out. We're going to try to do one of these a month. And check out the YouTube channel. You can just search out LI Retro and you can see all these videos. You will see Brendan and I on a few videos that are up right now, but we're going to continue to do our crazy journey through the Sega Genesis EverDrive at this point in time, and we'll hopefully add more EverDrives to it on our presentation called EverDives. So once again, I'm Mike Staub for Brendan Bailey. I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you all out there for listening. Be sure to give us a like and a subscribe on the internet, and we'll catch you next time on the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. And thanks again for listening, folks. We had a great time hanging out with Brendan Bailey. Please be sure to follow him on social media. And if you want to follow us, you can find us all over social media at LI Retro, or you can go to liretro.com. Keep your eyes on our social media platforms as well as our website, because we will be updating you with all of the cool new events happening in the future. And please do not sleep on the Festival of Gaming at the Cradle of Aviation on December 10th, 2022. We'll see you next time, and in the meantime, play some video games.